Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the chapter 15 story in the Ecce textbook and translate it together. Before we do that though, like I always say, make sure that you've memorized the vocab as best as you can. Practice it, read through the story, try to see where the new vocab shows up, so it'll help you give a leg up when you're translating. The next thing you want to do is make sure you have the grammar under control. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about neuter nouns, so I'll give you a quick refresher before we dive in, just to help you and see where the neuter nouns are in the story. I'll point them out as we go, but you want to make sure that you have a really good understanding of that and that you've read through the grammar in the textbook or watched, you could watch my chapter 15 grammar video if it helps you, but you've done something to make sure that you feel comfortable with gender, grammatical gender in this case, and neuter nouns in particular. Then once you have both those things done, you want to read the story out loud, right? Find a partner, find a classmate, someone you can read this to, and again, listen for the neuter nouns. You're going to hear the endings or the a endings. You're going to see they show up a lot. You want to listen to the Latin and try to catch the patterns, have someone read it back to you too, so that you not only hear yourself speaking and practicing your pronunciation, but you're listening to someone else reading it to you so that you can kind of catch all these different grammar points, and it'll help you with your translation. Before we go too far, though, we want to make sure that we've got the grammar under control. So, like I said, this is about neuter nouns. And you want to think back to what we've been doing for the first 14 chapters. You've been using gender this entire time, masculine and feminine. And you want to remember, we're talking about grammatical gender. It's how the Romans identified the world around them, the words in their language. They associated some of them with being a woman or being female. We call that feminine. And some they associated with being male, right? Masculine. Those are the two that we've seen so far. And up until this point, we've been saying that the nouns in the first declension or first group are feminine, and the nouns that were in the second declension or second group have been masculine. The third declension has been a mix of both. Well, now you're getting the complete picture because there's one more gender you need to know, and it's neuter. Neuter in Latin means neither. These are usually inanimate objects, but they're nouns that the Romans didn't associate with either masculinity or femininity. It was that sort of third other group, and we call that neuter. So what does that mean? Well, neuter nouns only show up in the second and third declensions. So when you're looking at your noun ending chart, first declension nouns are still going to be feminine, right? In second and third declension, though, now we're going to have another column of neuter nouns. And the way you can tell is a neuter noun in the second declension has a nominative singular ending of um. So for instance, if you look at the dictionary entry of certain words, right, the second declension nouns, the genitive singular, right, the second piece is always a long I. So hortus and auxilium are both second declension because they have the long I in the second piece, right, the second part of the noun. But you want to look at the first piece, which is the nominative singular. Hortus ends in a us and it's masculine. Auxilium ends in a um and it's neuter. That's a quick way to spot this whenever you have a dictionary entry in front of you or you're looking up the vocab. If you have a noun that's second declension and the nominative ends in a um, it's going to be neuter, right? So you can tell the gender right away. For third declension nouns, there's not a great way to tell. So you want to make sure that you're looking up these words in the dictionary and you're memorizing the vocab and that the gender is part of your memorization, right? The more you practice it, the more you're going to catch on which words are neuter. Another thing you want to keep in mind for neuter nouns is that they always have the same ending for nominative and accusative case. So for that word auxilium in the example above, the nominative is auxilium and the accusative is auxilium. They're spelled the same way. And when you have nominative or accusative plural, the ending is going to be an A, right? No matter what, it's always going to be an A. So that's why you learn the word vehicula. It meant vehicles, not vehicle. It looks singular, right? It looks like a first declension feminine noun, right? Nominative singular, but it's not. It's neuter, and that makes it accusative or nominative plural, which is why, again, vehicula always meant vehicles and not a vehicle. So when you have neuter nouns ending in A and you're not sure whether it's nominative or accusative, you always want to think about the context of the sentence, right? Use some common sense, use some logic. So for instance, if you saw vehicula onera magna ferunt, the verb ferunt is telling you something is bringing something. Your options are either onera, which means burdens, or vehicula, which means vehicles. So now you need to stop and think because they have the same ending. Does it make more sense to say the burdens carry the vehicles or the vehicles carry the burdens? It's the second one, right? The vehicles carry the burdens. That's how you know what your subject is. Just stop for a minute, use a little context and a little common sense, and you'll be all right. This, by the way, is our new noun ending chart. So feel free to add this to your notes. Do something so that you can recognize it and practice it. But again, you'll notice in second declension, now we have a second column with the end dot on top. Those are our neuter endings. And you want to pay attention. The nominative and accusative are always the same thing. The only odd part is in third declension, the dash. Whatever the nominative is, nominative singular, that's what the accusative singular will be too. So there's a ton more we could talk about for neuter nouns, but I think it's best if you do that on your own and looking at either the textbook or, like I said, my chapter 15 grammar video. But you want to practice this. Make sure you're doing some practice problems and you feel comfortable with neuter nouns so that you can recognize them in the story. But for now, we want to move on and start translating the story. So again, if you're not comfortable with the grammar, pause the video here, go back and look at the grammar, and then come back and watch how we translate this. So here's your chapter 15 story. Okay, and we're going to break it into pieces like we always do and highlight the different cases. So this is the first part of the story. The words in red are nominative. The words in blue are accusative. The words in pink or purple, I guess pink here, are ablative. And the words in green are going to be genitive. So once you get used to seeing this, look at the endings. You'll notice that the same endings keep getting color-coded the same way every time. That'll help you just practice getting your noun endings and your cases squared away. So we start with dum rida in fossa manebat, Marcus et sextus vehicula expectabant. So dum means while. So while the carriage, there's our subject, the rida, manebat, was remaining. It's imperfect tense. So was remaining in fossa, in the ditch. And you'll notice that fossa has a long A on it. It's ablative because you're showing position or location. It's a prepositional phrase. So it's in the ditch. So while the carriage was remaining in the ditch, Marcus and Sextus, here's our second subject, right, a plural subject, expectabant, they were watching or looking out for. What are they looking out for? Vehicula, vehicles. Now, if you're looking at this, vehicula is our first neuter noun that you encounter in this story. And you might have been wondering, how do I know if it's the subject or the direct object? Again, use some common sense. Vehicula could be a subject. It could be nominative plural. If it were the subject, you'd be saying the vehicles were looking out for something. It doesn't make sense because vehicles can't look out for anything. The other way you know is Marcus and Sextus, there's only one option. They have to be nominative, so they have to be your subject. So whenever you have a word like vehicula, a neuter noun that's got that plural ending, the A, there's two options. It can either be your subject, a plural subject, or a plural direct object. Here, because Marcus and Sextus have to be your subject, you know vehicula has to be the direct object. It's also the only way the sentence makes sense, right? Because you wouldn't say the vehicles were looking out for Marcus and Sextus. One, that doesn't make sense in English, and two, the grammar doesn't add up because Marcus and Sextus are nominative. So that's a long detour, but again, it's hitting at the idea of what the grammar of this chapter is all about. So Marcus and Sextus were watching for vehicles, or were looking out for vehicles. Then you have longum erat silentium. So there was, erat, a long silence. Again, silentium is a neuter noun. And we've always been saying that when you have the verb to be, est, or in this case, erat, both sides of the verb to be are going to be nominative case. So silentium and longum are both nominative, but they end in a un. That's totally fine. It's because they're neuter. So silentium is the nominative, right? There was a long silence. Then we have diu, nullum vehiculum apparet. So diu for a long time, nullum vehiculum, right? There's vehicle again. It's neuter. No vehicle appears. How do we know it was the subject, right? It could have been a direct object. Well, if you flip it around, it won't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to say for a long time, he, she, or it appears no vehicle. It just doesn't add up. It has to be your subject. No vehicle appears. Then we have tandem, Marcus murmur rotarum audet et procul nubem pulveris conspicit. So at last, or finally, tandem, Marcus, there's my subject, audet, he hears. Now again, murmur is a third declension neuter noun. So the nominative singular is murmur. That's how you saw it in your vocab list, right? If the nominative singular is murmur, the accusative singular is also spelled murmur. That's what we mean on the chart when we have the dash in both spots, right? So how do we know the murmur wasn't the subject? Again, if you make it the subject, you'd be saying the murmur audet, the murmur hears. It just doesn't make any sense. Plus, we already have a subject with Marcus. The US ending means Marcus is the subject. So you're saying Marcus hears, Marcus audet, the murmur, there's our direct object, and we have a genitive coming after it, rotarum, the murmur of the wheels, genitive plural. So he hears the rumbling or murmur of wheels, and procul in the distance, conspicit, he catches sight of, meaning Marcus catches sight of, in the distance, a nubem, a cloud. There's our accusative. It's what he caught sight of. He caught sight of a cloud, nubem, pulveris, of dust. It's genitive. Okay, so in this first section, you're already starting to see the neuter nouns. Sometimes they're direct objects, sometimes they're subjects in this chunk. It's totally fine. Just think about what we said with neuter nouns. Use a little context to figure out whether it's a subject or a direct object. Now we have the next section, sextus, quid est marce, esne plaustrum? So here, sextus is asking a question, so rogat or inquit, however you want to put it, but it's implied, the verb that he's asking something, right? So sextus says or asks, quid est, what is it, Marcus, right? Marce is vocative. He's calling Marcus by name. So he says, what is it, Marcus? Meaning, what do you see? And he says, esne plaustrum. Remember, the ne on esne just means you're asking a question where you're expecting a yes or no answer. So you can translate this as, is it, right? Is it a plaustrum? Is it a wagon? And again, plaustrum is a neuter noun. Notice the ending, it's nominative in this case because it's going with the verb to be. So is it a wagon? Marcus, minime fatue, plaustra onera magna ferunt. So Marcus responds and says, minime, no, fatue. Fatue means stupid, right? It's coming from fatuus, which is an adjective meaning stupid. Here, he's using it in the vocative case, meaning he's calling Sextus stupid. That's the name he chooses to call him, right? So fatue is vocative. You can tell by the E. So he says, no, stupid. Plaustra, meaning wagons, right? It's the plural of plaustrum. Wagons, ferunt, they bring or they carry, onera magna, large burdens, right? Big burdens or big loads. Again, plaustra and onera both end in an A. So how did I know which one was the subject? Use some common sense, right? You're either saying the plaustra carry the burdens, wagons carry burdens, or burdens carry wagons. It just doesn't make sense to have onera be your subject. So just think about your options and you'll always get to the right answer. Then we have tarda igitur sunt. So therefore, igitur, they are, sunt, tarda, slow. So he's saying wagons are slow because they're carrying really heavy burdens. Said illud vehiculum, rather, celeriter apropinquad. So, but that vehicle, illud vehiculum, right? Illud means that. That vehicle is approaching apropinquad, celeriter, quickly. And again, how do we know vehiculum was the subject? It's the only thing that makes sense. If you make vehiculum or think of it as a direct object, you'd be saying, but he, she, or it is approaching the vehicle quickly. It just doesn't really add up, right? It doesn't add up. It makes much more sense because he's talking about a vehicle approaching them. It makes sense for vehiculum to be the subject. He's saying that vehicle is approaching quickly. Then Sextus, right, he responds, ita vero, praeterea equi illud vehiculum trahunt. So he says, yes, ita vero, yes, indeed, right? And he says, horses, right, the equi trahunt illud vehiculum. He says horses are dragging that vehicle or pulling that vehicle. Again, equi is our subject. Illud vehiculum here, and I'll go back a second, it's the same phrasing we just saw at the end of the last section. Here, illud vehiculum was the subject. In this line, illud vehiculum is the direct object. How do we know that? Because we already have a subject with equi, right? He's saying besides, right? Praeterea, besides, horses drag or are dragging that vehicle, right? It has to be the direct object, illud vehiculum. And again, the reason they're spelled the same is because neuter nouns have the same spelling in nominative and accusative, so subjects and direct objects. Then it continues. You have boves plaustra trahunt, fortasse est rida. So boves is our subject, right? Cows. And again, how do we know that? Because the es ending could be either or. Again, use some common sense. You're either saying the oxen or the cows, right? The oxen drag wagons or the wagons drag oxen. It doesn't make sense to say that wagons drag oxen. That just doesn't add up. So boves is our subject. Oxen, drag, trahunt, plaustra, wagons. Fortasse est rida, perhaps it is a carriage. So they're trying to figure out what vehicle they're looking at, and they're describing what they see to try to narrow it down. So Sextus is saying, yeah, that's true. Horses are dragging this vehicle, and oxen drag wagons. So it can't be a wagon. Maybe it's a rida. Maybe it's a carriage. Non est rida, inquit Marcus. Nam quatuor rotas habet rida. So Marcus says, it's not a rida. Non est rida. It's not a carriage. Because nam, it has, a rida has, so a carriage has, habet, quatuor rotas, 4 wheels. So he's saying a carriage has 4 wheels. Illud vehiculum duas tantum rotas habet. So he's saying that vehicle has habet duas rotas. Tantum means only, so only 2 wheels. So again, he's saying it can't be a carriage because a carriage has 4 wheels, and this vehicle, right, or that vehicle, illud vehiculum, only has 2 wheels. Again, how did I know vehiculum had to be my subject? It's the only thing that makes sense. Duas rotas is clearly the direct object, so you can't have vehiculum being a direct object. It has to be the subject. The vehicle has 2 wheels.